Welcome to the world of sci-fi story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe the channel. Enjoy the listening. The descent into the unknown. Ethan Cross took a deep breath, brushing the dust off his jacket. His ship had crashed on this strange planet after a navigation failure. The land was covered in ruins, massive stone structures with strange glowing symbols. He didn't know where he was, but his instincts told him this place was ancient and dangerous. He touched the side of his helmet, trying to call for help. Nothing, no signal, no way back. He was completely alone, or so he thought as he stepped forward. The ground beneath him crumbled. He tried to jump back, but it was too late. The ground collapsed, pulling him into the darkness. Below, trapped beneath the ruins, Ethan hit the ground hard, rolling over sharp rocks. Pain shot through his arm, but nothing felt broken. He groaned and pushed himself up. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe. He looked up. The hole he fell through was too high to climb. The walls around him were smooth, covered in strange glowing symbols. His flashlight flickered as he scanned the area. It looked like he had fallen into an underground temple or tomb. The walls stretched into endless shadows, leading deeper into the unknown. A chill ran down his spine. The air felt alive. Then he heard it, a whisper, soft, almost like the wind, but there was no wind down here. Ethan froze. He wasn't alone. The shadows moved. He grabbed his plasma knife and held it tight. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the tunnel. His heart pounded as he took slow, careful steps forward. His boots crunched over dust and small bones of creatures long dead. Then out of the darkness they appeared. Two figures stepped into the dim blue light of the glowing symbols. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. They weren't human. The first one had golden skin, her eyes glowing like twin suns. Her long silver hair flowed down her back like liquid metal. The second had deep sapphire blue skin, her dark eyes filled with intelligence. Her short, sharp hair framed her face, giving her a warrior's look. Ethan took a step back, but they didn't attack. They just watched him. Then the golden-skinned one spoke. "You finally came back, a mystery from the past." Ethan's blood ran cold. He had never been here before. What were they talking about? "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough. "And what do you mean, came back?" The blue-skinned one, her voice smooth as silk, replied, "You don't remember." Ethan tightened his grip on his knife. He didn't trust them. He had no reason to. Yet something about this place felt familiar. The golden one stepped closer, her glowing eyes scanning him like she was searching for something. "We have waited a long time," she whispered. "You are the key to what?" Ethan demanded. Before she could answer, the ruins shook violently. Dust rained from above. The whispering voices turned into agonized screams. Ethan's breath quickened. Something was waking up. The blues skin sister looked at him sharply. "We need to move now." "Move where?" Ethan demanded. The golden sister turned to the tunnel ahead, deeper. Ethan hesitated. He didn't trust them. He didn't know what was happening, but he had no other choice. The entrance was sealed. The only way was forward. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped into the darkness, following the two alien sisters into the unknown. Secrets buried in time. Ethan's boots echoed against the stone floor as he followed the two alien sisters deeper into the ruins. The flickering blue light from the ancient symbols cast eerie shadows on the walls. His grip tightened around his plasma knife, his heart pounding in his chest. He still didn't trust them. The golden-skinned sister Lyra moved gracefully ahead, her glowing eyes scanning the passage. The blue-skinned one, Syria, walked beside him, her expression unreadable. He had so many questions. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice bouncing off the stone walls. "The core of the ruins," Lyra replied without looking back. Ethan frowned. "Why? What's down there?" Syria turned her dark gaze toward him, answers that wasn't comforting. "The weight of the past." Ethan glanced at the glowing symbols carved into the walls. They looked ancient, far older than any civilization he had seen before. Some of them resembled human writing, but others were completely alien, filled with complex geometric patterns and strange curved lines. "You said I came back," he said after a moment. "I'd never been here before." Syria tilted her head slightly. "Not in this life." Ethan stopped walking. His stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" Lyra finally turned to face him, Her expression was calm, but her glowing eyes burned with something deeper, a memory, a truth he didn't understand. "This place is older than your kind remembers," she said. "Humans were here before long ago, and you." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You are connected to them." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "That's impossible." Possible, but was it? His mind raced. He had heard of lost human expeditions, of ancient ruins with strange connections to Earth. Scientists talked about forgotten colonies, lost generations. Could it be true? The dead are watching. Before Ethan could respond, a low echoing sound rumbled through the ruins. It was not the wind. The ground trembled beneath them, and the whispering voices returned. Only this time they weren't whispers, they were pleading. Ethan spun around, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The walls seemed to move, shifting like living things. His breath caught as he saw something impossible. Shadowy figures stood in the halls, hundreds of them. They weren't solid, they flickered like holograms, their faces blurry, their eyes hollow, but their presence was undeniable. Syria stepped forward. "They are the lost ones." Ethan's throat went dry. "Ghosts." Lyra shook her head. "No, echoes of the past, the memories of those who perished here." Ethan swallowed hard. The figures weren't attacking, they just stood there watching. Then, all at once, they spoke. "You must Newt, do it." Their voices roared through the halls like a storm. A pulse of energy surged through the air. The symbols on the walls flared brighter, casting everything in an eerie blue glow. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the figures vanished. Ethan exhaled sharply, his heart racing. What the hell was that? Syria's expression was grim, a warning. Lyra turned away. "We need to keep moving." Ethan hesitated, but the tremors were growing stronger. Dust rained from above. Whatever was happening in this place, it was getting worse. He had no choice. He followed the sisters deeper into the darkness. The prison below. The air grew heavier as they descended. The tunnels narrowed, and the walls became smoother, as if carved by something not human. Finally, they reached a massive metallic door at the end of the passage. It was covered in strange mechanical locks, its surface engraved with more of the glowing symbols. Ran a hand over it. The metal was warm. "This isn't just a ruin, is it?" he muttered. "No," Lyra said softly. "This is a prison." Ethan snapped his gaze to her. "A prison for what?" Syria stepped forward, placing her hand against the door. The symbols pulsed under her touch. "Something that should never wake again." A loud boom echoed behind them. Ethan spun around. The passage they had come through was collapsing. The ruins were sealing them, and his pulse raced. "What the hell is happening?" Sarah looked at him, her dark eyes serious. "It knows you are here." The metal door began to hum. The glowing symbol started shifting, moving like liquid. The air crackled with energy. Ethan's breath quickened. Something on the other side of the door was waking up, something ancient, something hungry. The awakening of the shadows. A low hum vibrated through the air. Ethan felt it deep in his bones, a pulse of energy that made his skin tingle. The massive metallic door in front of them groaned as the symbols on its surface shifted, like something inside was stirring. The ruins around them trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling and cracked spider webbed across the stone walls. Syria and Lyra stood completely still, their glowing eyes locked onto the door. Ethan's instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The passage behind them had collapsed. They were trapped. The hum grew louder, becoming a deep, resonating chant, like an ancient song vibrating through time itself. The blue energy and the symbols swirled into spirals, their patterns changing before his eyes. Then a whisper echoed through the chamber. It was deep, ancient, and it spoke his name. "Ethan Cross, you have returned." His breath caught in his throat. "I don't know this place. I've never been here before." But something inside him disagreed, a feeling, a memory just out of reach. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. "It remembers you." Ethan turned to her, eyes wide. "What the hell is it?" Syria answered without looking at him. "A mistake." The ground shook violently. The metal door let out a sharp, ear-piercing screech, bending outward like something inside was pushing against it. And then the door burst open. The shadows rise. A wave of freezing air blasted through the chamber, knocking Ethan to the ground. The lantern he had clipped to his belt flickered wildly, casting long, chaotic shadows across the walls. From the darkness beyond the door, a shape emerged. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. The thing that stepped out was not alive, not in any way He understood its body was a writhing mass of shifting black mist, humanoid in shape but with no clear features. Its eyes were nothing but deep voids pulling in the surrounding light. It didn't walk, it floated, its body pulsing and changing. With each slow, deliberate movement, Ethan gritted his teeth and took a step back. His gut told him one thing: this thing should not exist. The shadow creature tilted its head, and then it spoke again, but not with a voice. It spoke inside Ethan's mind. "You do not remember, but I remember you." Pain stabbed through Ethan's skull. His vision blurred, and suddenly his mind was not his own. Any more memories, not his own. A flash, a blinding light, then darkness. Ethan was no longer in the ruins. He saw a different time, a different world. A battle in the stars, humans and aliens fighting together, their ships burning. Explosions ripping through the sky. Then a planet. This planet, ruins before they were ruins, towering spires of metal and glass, advanced technology unlike anything Earth had ever known. And in the heart of it all, himself. Ethan saw his own face, but it wasn't him, it was someone else, a man who looked like him, but older, a warrior leading the charge against the very creature now standing before him. The shadow thing had been sealed away, buried beneath the ground by humans, by him. The vision shattered. Ethan gasped, stumbling backward as his mind returned to the present. His heart pounded like a warrum. What the hell was that? The shadow figure loomed over him. "You were always meant to return," a fake decided long ago. Ethan clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. This isn't possible. He was just an explorer, a man trying to survive. But now he was standing in front of a creature that knew him from a time that shouldn't exist. He looked at Lyra and Syria. "Tell me the truth." His voice was sharp, demanding. "Who am I?" Syria didn't speak right away. When she did, her words chilled him to the core. "You are the last descendant of the ones who locked this creature away." Ethan's hands trembled. "So what? I'm just supposed to finish what they started?" The shadow let out a low, rumbling laugh that sent a wave of cold through the air. "You cannot finish what was never meant to end." The ruin shook violently again, but this time the collapse wasn't coming from behind them. It was coming from above. A race against time. Cracks splintered across the ceiling, and massive chunks of stone started falling. The ruins were collapsing, the ancient prison breaking apart. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but the shadow creature wasn't done. Its form began to shift, stretching like liquid darkness, spreading across the floor and walls. The symbols on the metal door, once glowing with power, faded into nothingness. "Run!" Lyra shouted, grabbing Ethan's arm. Syria raised her hands, and a barrier of golden energy erupted between them and the shadow, but it wouldn't hold for long. Ethan's legs finally responded. He turned and sprinted down in a narrow tunnel, following the sisters as the ruins came crashing down around them. The whispers followed. "You cannot escape what you are." A massive stone pillar collapsed just behind him, nearly crushing his legs. He jumped, rolling forward, landing hard against a broken stairway. His vision spun. His breath came in sharp gasps. The entire ruin was falling apart. Lyra turned back, her golden eyes blazing. "We have to reach the control chamber." Ethan gritted his teeth, pushing himself up. "What's in the control chamber?" Syria answered with a grim expression. "The only thing that can stop it, the final gate." The tunnel narrowed into a steep ramp leading toward a final chamber carved from solid obsidian metal. Massive doors stood at the end, lined with markings that pulsed like a heartbeat. Ethan could feel it now, a power unlike anything he had ever known. The sisters rushed forward, placing their hands against the door. A deep rumble shook the chamber as the doors began to slide open behind them. The shadow creature roared, a horrible, soul-wrenching sound. Ethan looked back and froze. The creature wasn't chasing them. It was becoming something else. The writhing black mass expanded, shifting into the shape of a human, a man. Ian's own face stared back at him, but the eyes were pure darkness. The creature smiled. "You cannot run from yourself, the mirror of the past." The massive obsidian doors groaned as they slid open, revealing a colossal chamber bathed in eerie blue light. Ethan's breath hitched. The space was unlike anything he had seen before. Vast, ancient, alive, towering structures of polished black metal rose high above. covered in pulsing symbols that twisted and changed as if they were rewriting themselves. Strange floating orbs of energy hovered in the air, casting shifting shadows across the room. At the very center of the chamber stood a monolithic structure, shaped like an enormous black obelisk. It pulsed with energy, sending rhythmic waves through the floor. It was old, far older than anything humans had ever built, and Ethan felt it in his bones. He had been here before, a name forgotten in time. The air hummed with an unnatural presence, and behind him, the shadow figure followed. Ethan's own face stared back at him from the writhing, dark mist of the creature. Its eyes were still empty voids, but its mouth curled into a knowing smirk. "You remember now, don't you?" the creature whispered, its voice layered with echoes of 1,000 others. Ethan clenched his fists. His heart was hammering, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." Lyra and Syria stood at the edges of the chamber, watching the obelisk. Their glowing eyes scanned its surface, searching for something. The shadow chuckled. "Lies." Ethan took a step forward. "You're pretending to be me." "Why?" The creature tilted its head, its expression one of amusement. "Pretending?" It let out a low chuckle. "I am not pretending." Ethan crossed the chamber, shuddered, and suddenly the obelisk flared brilliant white. A shockwave erupted from its core, and the entire world shifted. Visions of another life. Ethan gasped as his surroundings changed. He was no longer in the ruins. He was somewhere else. He stood in the middle of a great battlefield. The sky above, filled with burning ships, alien vessels clashed with human warcraft, their weapons cutting through space like furious gods of war. The air smelled of smoke and fire, of ozone and death, and in front of him stood the obelisk. But it was whole, not broken, not buried. He turned, his mind spinning, and saw a man standing beside him, a human dressed in a deep black uniform with the glowing emblem on his chest. His face was scared, his expression grim, and he looked exactly like Ethan. "Commander," the man said. "It's time." The vision ripped apart, and Ethan snapped back into the ruins. Gasping for breath, his knees buckled, and he braced himself against the floor. His mind was burning, his head throbbed with knowledge. He didn't understand the shadow creature. His own reflection stepped stiff forward. "Do you see now?" it whispered. "You were here before. You fought this war before, and you lost." Ethan shook his head violently. No, it wasn't possible. But deep inside, he felt the truth pressing against him, clawing at the edges of his mind. This wasn't just a prison, it was a graveyard for the forgotten past. And Ethan wasn't just a survivor, he was a returning soldier. The Guardian's final warning. Lyra moved swiftly, her golden skin glowing brighter. She reached for Ethan's arm, her fingers pressing into his wrist. "Do not listen to it," she commanded. "It wants to break you." Ethan's breath was shaky. "What is it?" Sarah's voice was low, a remnant of the war, a creature that should never have been made. The shadow smiled. "You created me." Ethan's heart stopped. The room shook violently, and the obelisk, pulsing light, dimmed. The ruins were becoming unstable. The prison was failing. Lyra turned toward the obelisk, pressing her palm against its symbols shifted and glowed beneath her touch, responding to her energy. Syria glanced at Ethan. "You must activate the fail-safe." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Fail safe?" Lyra nodded. "You are the last of your bloodline. Only you can end what was started." The obelisk flared again. The shadow creature snarled. "You would destroy your own legacy." It hissed on, took a shaky step toward the obelisk. He could feel it calling to him like an old friend, like an enemy waiting in the dark. His mind raced. What if the shadow was right? What if this wasn't just a prison, but something more? What if destroying it meant erasing everything about the past? The obelisk pulsed again. The ruins screamed, shaking violently. Ethan had a choice: activate the fail-safe, and this. Listen to the shadow, uncover the truth. He hesitated. The shadow smiled. "There it is." Doubt. The obelisk flared brighter than ever, sending one final pulse through the room. The ground beneath them cracked open, revealing the depthless abyss below. Everything was collapsing. Lyra grabbed his arm, her voice sharp. "Ethan, there is no time." The shadow lunged forward. Ethan had seconds to decide. Race against the dark. The ruins were falling apart. Massive cracks split through the ancient stone, and debris rained from the ceiling as the entire structure shuddered violently. The obelisk in the center of the chamber pulsed like a dying heart, its once bright symbols flickering in and out of existence. Ethan stood frozen between two impossible choices. On one side Lyra and Syria, their glowing eyes filled with urgency. They were urging him to activate the fail-safe to end this nightmare before it was too late. On the other, the shadow creature wearing his face, whispering of a past he could barely remember. It spoke of forgotten wars, hidden truths, and something far greater than just a prison. The air was thick with tension, heavy with power. Then the shadow moved with inhuman speed. It lunged toward Ethan, its form twisting and stretching like a storm of darkness. "You o Eeyore, o what you are!" Ethan dove to the side just in time. The creature's hand, a long blackened claw, slashed through the air. Where he had been standing, the very space around it distorted. The ruins groaned in response to its presence. Syria threw up a barrier of golden lights, separating Ethan from the creature. The shadow slammed against it, letting out an ear-piercing shriek as it recoiled from the energy. Ethan, Lyra shouted, "We have to move now. The prison is failing." The obelisk behind Ethan let out a deepening boom, sending another shockwave rippling through the chamber. The ruins trembled even harder, and in entire sections of the ceiling collapsed into the abyss below. The fail-safe was failing. The prison was opening. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding. He had wasted too much time. He had to act. He turned to Laura and Syria. "Where's the activation point?" Syria motioned toward the center of the obelisk, where a swirling core of energy pulsed within the black stone. "You must touch it. Only your bloodline can trigger the seal." Ethan nodded, steeling himself. This had to end. He sprinted forward, and the shadow exploded through the barrier. A black tendril lashed out, wrapping around Ethan's arm before he could reach the obelisk. Pain, a surge of cold, burning agony, shot through his body. As the shadow's energy sank into his skin, his vision blurred, and suddenly the ruins around him changed. A second life, a second death. Ethan was no longer standing in the collapsing chamber. He was in a place that shouldn't exist. The sky above him was red, the air thick with the scent of smoke and blood. Massive structures of alien architecture stretched into the horizon, their metallic surfaces scorched by war, and before him stood an army of shadows, hundreds, thousands of them, all watching him with hollow black eyes. A man stood in front of them. Ethan recognized him immediately. It was him, but not him. It was a version of himself from another time, another life. The warrior who had fought this war before. This version of Ethan turned his gaze, locking onto his future self. He wasn't afraid. He was angry. "You were supposed to finish this," he said, his voice hard as steel. "And now you've given it a second chance." Ethan's chest tightened. "I don't understand." The warrior pointed toward the shadow army behind him. "They were not always monsters. They were once men, soldiers. We made them what they are." The air grew heavier. "The obelisk was never a prison," the warrior continued. "It was a last resort, a containment field for something we created." Ethan's mind reeled. The shadow wasn't some ancient evil. It was the remnant of an experiment gone wrong, a weapon that had absorbed its creators, and now it wanted him to finish what had been started. The warrior Ethan took a step forward. "This is your choice." Now his eyes narrowed. "Seal it away, or let it finish what we started." The vision shattered. "The choice that defines everything," Ethan gasped as he was slammed back into the present. The ruins were still collapsing, the obelisk still flickering between life and death. The shadow loomed over him, its tendrils digging into his skin, pulling him closer. "You see now," it whispered, "you cannot kill what you are. We are the same." Ethan gritted his teeth. The warrior's words echoed in his mind. This was a weapon, a mistake, and it had to end. Summoning every ounce of his strength, Ethan ripped free from the tendrils. Ignoring the burning pain in his arm, he staggered forward, his vision swimming. Lyra reached for him. "Ethan, you must." He didn't hesitate. With a final determined breath, he slammed his palm against the obelisk. The fail-safe activates. The reaction was immediate. A blinding wave of golden light exploded from the obelisk, shooting through the entire chamber. The symbols, once dim, flared with raw energy, pulsing brighter and brighter. The shadows screamed. Its body convulsed as the energy tore through it, unraveling its form like a fraying thread. "No, we or own new and oat." The ruins collapsed around them, but Ethan did not stop. He pressed harder, forcing every ounce of his will into the obelisk. The energy surged outward, Sweeping through the tunnels, the ancient halls, the entire buried city, the shadow was being pulled back. It clawed at the walls, at the floor, at him, desperate to hold on. But it was too late. With one final earth-shaking pulse, the obelisk power swallowed the darkness. Whole silence, the shaking stopped, the air stilled, the ruins, once on the verge of total collapse, became deeply quiet. Ethan collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. It was over. Or was it? Lyra and Sarah helped him to his feet. Their faces were tired but relieved. It worked, Syria murmured. The seal is restored. Ethan looked down at his hand. The place where the shadow had touched him was different. A faint dark mark lingered on his skin, pulsing softly and deep inside his mind. A whisper remained, "This is not the end." Ethan exhaled sharply. No, it wasn't it. It was only the beginning, the ultimate choice. Ethan Cross stood in the middle of the ruins, his breath right, his body heavy with exhaustion. The obelisk no longer pulsed with raw energy. The glowing symbols had dimmed, returning to their dormant state. The chamber was silent, the very air around them eerily still. For the first time since arriving, the whispers had vanished. It was over, or so he thought. He looked down at his right hand, where the dark mark still pulsed softly against his skin. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but he felt it, a presence lingering in the back of his mind, a whisper that refused to fade, a warning, unspoken. Aura and Syria stood beside him, their glowing eyes watching him with cautious relief. "You sealed it," Lyra said, her voice calm but heavy. "The prison has been restored." Syria, however, remained tense. Her gaze flickered between the obelisk and Ethan's marked hand. "Something's wrong," she murmured. Ethan didn't respond. He knew she was right. The ruins had stopped collapsing, but the air still crackled with an unnatural presence. The temperature was too cold, the stillness too unnatural. It was as if the entire place was holding its breath. And then it happened. The floor beneath them shifted. Ethan stack Ed, barely keeping his balance. Lyra's golden eyes widened. Sarah's hands instinctively glowed with energy. The obelisk flared back to life. A final message, the true cost of the seal. A beam of white energy shot up from the obelisk, forming into a shape, a figure standing tall in the air, flickering like an old hologram. Ethan's blood went cold. It was him, not the shadow, not a reflection. It was the man from his visions, the warrior, the past version of himself. And when he spoke, his voice echoed like it had traveled across time itself. "You have done what I could not." Ethan's breath caught the image of his past self, looked directly at him, its eyes filled with something that felt too real to be just a memory. "But the war is not over." The ruins shuddered again, and Ethan felt the mark on his hand burn. He gritted his teeth, clutching his arm. "What do you mean?" he growled. "I sealed it. The shadow is gone. The past." Ethan's expression remained GM. "You sealed it here, but not everywhere." A sick feeling twisted in Ethan's gut. The figure raised a hand, pointing toward him. The darkness was never just one, it was many. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. No, that wasn't possible. The obelisk was built to contain a single fragment of the entity. Syria whispered, realization dawning on her face. But if there were more? Ethan clenched his fists. "Then it's still out there." The past self's form flickered, beginning to fade. "The cycle has not ended, it has only begun again." And then the vision vanished. The obelisk dimmed once more, and the ruins returned to their eerie stillness. But now the silence felt even heavier. "The war has never ended." Lyra turned to Ethan, her golden gaze unreadable. "We have to leave," she said. Now Ethan nodded, his thoughts racing. He had stopped one threat, but if the vision was right, there were more out there. The shadow's words echoed in his mind. "You cannot erase what you are." Ethan swallowed hard, pushing the thought away. Syria pressed her palm against a nearby wall, and a hidden passage rumbled open, revealing the narrow tunnel leading upward. "This should take us back to the surface," she said. Ethan took a deep breath. One way or another, they were getting out of this place. But as he stepped forward, the whisper returned. It was faint, almost inaudible, but it was there. "We are waiting." Ethan froze, his heart pounded, and for the first time since arriving on this planet, he felt genuinely afraid. The final stand. Ethan Cross stepped into the narrow escape tunnel, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. The whisper still echoed in his mind, soft, haunting, waiting. He clenched his fists, trying to ignore the pulsing mark on his hand. He didn't know if the others could see it, but he felt it, a dark presence lingering just beneath his skin, whispering secrets. He refused to listen to a head. Lyra and Syria moved swiftly through the passage, their glowing eyes scanning for threats. The air in the tunnel was thick, charged with tension. The ruins had stopped collapsing, but something still felt wrong. The obelisk was sealed, the creature was gone, so why did it feel like something was still watching him? The surface beckons, the passage sloped upward, rough stone walls curving around them. The deeper they went, the brighter the air became. Ethan could see the end of the tunnel now, a faint blue glow spilling from an opening. He exhaled sharply. They were almost out. But as they reached the exit, Sarah suddenly stopped. Ethan nearly crashed into her. What the hell? She held up a hand, her dark blue eyes narrowing. Something is wrong. Lyra's gaze snapped toward the tunnel's exit. She lifted her hand and golden energy flared around her fingers. Ethan tense. He hadn't heard or seen anything, but he had learned to trust them. A second later he heard it. A low hum, not like before, not like the obelisk or the collapsing ruins. This was mechanical. His instinct screamed, "We're not alone." Lyra gave him a sharp look. "Stay close." Ethan pulled out his plasma knife, its blade flickering to life with a soft hiss. His muscles tensed as they stepped out of the tunnel. The ambush, the world outside, was not as they left it. Ethan expected the desolate ruins, the endless, alien landscape stretching into the distance. He expected to see his crashed ship, the wreckage still smoking from impact. Instead, they were surrounded. A fleet of sleek black ships hovered in the sky, their forms sharp and angular. Strange floating drones moved in synchronized patterns, scanning the ruins with eerie precision. And standing in the center of it all was them, the other ones, more of the shadows. They were different from the one he had sealed away, less fluid, more solid. Their forms were humanoid, but their faces were blank, just smooth masks of reflective black. They moved with inhuman precision, their bodies unnervingly still, and they were waiting for him. The war had already begun. Ethan's blood ran cold. The whispering in his mind grew louder. "We told you, we are waiting." Lyra stepped in front of him, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Stay behind us." Ethan gritted his teeth. No chance. One of the shadow soldiers moved forward, its body rippled like liquid metal as it tilted its head toward Ethan. "The seal is broken. The cycle continues." Ethan tightened his grip on his knife. "I sealed it. It's over." The figure didn't react. "You sealed one, but we are many." His breath caught in his throat. They were never meant to contain just one. The obelisk had been a single fragment of something much larger. The shadow he fought wasn't the true enemy. It was only a small piece, and the rest had been waiting for him to wake them up. Ethan felt a sudden sharp pain in his hand. He gasped, clutching his arm. As the mark burned hotter, a flood of memories, or maybe warnings, rushed into his mind. A war long forgotten, a battle never finished, an enemy that had never been defeated. His own past self had been trying to stop this, and he had failed. Lyra and Syria tensed as the shadow figures took another step forward. "This isn't over." Suwa whispered. Ethan forced himself to stay calm, but his mind was racing. If the obelisk was only a small piece, then the real fight had never even begun. The final decision. The shadows didn't attack immediately. They were waiting for him. Ethan's mind spun. He had two choices: fight now, take a stand, even if they were outnumbered; find another way, escape, regroup, prepare for the real battle. Lyra's eyes met his. "We don't have long." The whispers in his mind grew louder, more urgent. The shadows didn't see him as an enemy. Not yet. They saw him as one of them, because he was. Ethan took a slow breath. The mark on his hand pulsed. He had sealed the past away, but the future, the war, had only just begun. Final line. Ethan exhaled and took his first step forward. "Then let's finish this."